大家好，不好意思啊，因为我7月1号的飞机要到英国做一个研究啊，英国大学已经把那个机票买好，我也不能改日期，因为我必须去那边待1个多月，所以不得已用录影的方式啊，请大家见谅。好，我今天要跟大家分享的是一个I'm going to address a notion uh, uh, which is the embedding is our visionary agency within the economical cultural capital formation discovered through a study taking Malaysia high school graduate as our subject. Anyway, I'm going to share my empirical findings with you. Well, actually, this article has been published on a journal on the list of SACI. If you want, you can download its PDF from this DOI number. So the first part is introduction. While the cultural capital perspective is reasonably effective in describing how cultural reproduction occurs, and while its structuralist approach neglects the influence of agency on the practice of cultural capital. In other words, the cultural capital perspective has largely neglected the influence of agentic action on cultural capital or on the return of cultural capital. In light of this association, this study set out to investigate how agency constitutes the practice of cultural capital and what types of influence on students' educational attainment is generated in Malaysia. So we have outlined our research purpose. So the second step is to present our theoretical concept. The first one is the perspective of cultural reproduction. Educational certifications are able to align the culture field with other fields, including political and economic. Through their functions of scholastic and economic capital, this power penetration assists middle class culture to become the source of curriculum development. Therefore, when school curriculum become academic, its contents will address logical relations and abstract concept or academic concept. As a result, curriculum contents underscore theoretical concept and their logical relations, whereby a built-in exclusive selection favoring middle-class students' culture competence implicitly operates. Social control is now no longer relied upon the coercive force, but rather on symbolic violence exerted through cultural capital, which acts as a proxy, maintaining cultural reproduction. So we can see the interactive relation between symbolic violence, culture capital, and education result. Better material conditions enable middle-class parents to invest a high volume of cultural capital in their social space, particularly in family social space, through which their children develop an academic happiness compatible with the reasoning ability demanded by school curriculum. And we said this is mainly because school curriculum become academic, addressing theoretical concept and logical relations. So this situation will favor middle class students. In contrast, working class parents are constrained by poor economic capital, so their children are often displayed manually oriented habits that lead to failure in school. I think this picture has been well documented by many studies. For example, Police has produced a very famous book entitled Learning to Labor, published in 1977. Well, the perspective of cultural reproduction has been well documented by a series of studies showing that the high SES students are dedicated to undertaking educational actions that foster the acquisition of excellent academic performance in their children. This situation can be attributed to the one-way convertible relation from economic capital to cultural capital, which is activated by educational belief that understand the advantages of educational credentials, particularly in the labor market. Without the support of cultural capital, most low SES students fall into an underachieving group displaying poor educational attainment in communication skills, reading achievement, language, literacy, and mathematical competency, which can explain why they often leave school after completing their compulsory education. So after we understand the key point of the perspective of cultural reproduction, we need to discover or analyze its shortcoming as well. So that's why we are going to look at this part through critique. The perspective of cultural mobility points out that the gains of cultural capital are often manufactured by environmental conditions, particularly the constitution of students in individual schools, which are diverse to some extent. This situation indicates when the density of high SES students in schools increases, their competition of cultural capital becomes strong, which dramatically reduces the fruits of their cultural capital. In other words, it's quite difficult to show off your cultural capital because the other classmates also possess a high value of cultural capital. Therefore, this competition becomes very tense. In spite of this difference, both of the approach about are based on structuralism, which overlooks agency. In this regard, if an actor can appropriate the usage of cultural capital to meet the requirements of contextual futures, they are likely to harvest better returns and vice versa. Related research has confirmed this assumption by theorizing that if actors are able to exercise agency to acquire cultural capital available in the social space other than that of the family, they become cultural capital constructors, no longer impeded by the lack of cultural capital afforded by their own family social space. So this study discovered how how working class students become cultural capital constructors who are able to discover cultural capital available in other space like a school or community library or friends. Okay, it has been reported that creative actions are often evoked by rational minds that cast by better educational backgrounds, as witnessed by the systematical education actions parents take to ensure their children's learning outcomes. All this indicates that the high SES parents are apt to the exercise of agency. So this is relation pointed to another principle that if they can undertake visionary actions, then they are able to help their children. in learning. And such action normally are maintained or initiated, generated by educational vision. So, you understand this relationship, then we need to examine. So, 5 research questions highlighted here. I'm not going to repeat it because I don't have too much time for my keynote speech. So, students' EUC scores as the result of cultural capital should be regulated by independent variables, the character of which can be classified into 2 levels. Level 1 consists of parents' qualification, occupations, and the students' gender, numbers of siblings, and the choice of high school courses. Let me explain the meaning of UEC scores. UEC score serve as the mean for is a test. If one senior Malaysia high school graduate want to attend a university, then they need to present their UEC scores. It's much like a university entrance examination result. Level 2 is comprised of high school location and size. It's likely that the parents' qualification and occupation directly condition family incomes, which are associated with family cultural capital. This the distribution of family cultural capital may be affected by students' characteristics, such as gender, number of siblings, and high school courses. That's why we classify students' variables into 2 subcategories. Considering these factors, it is necessary to demarcate level 1 variables into 2 subcategories, namely family variables containing parents' qualification and occupation, and student variable, including gender, sibling, and high school courses. So this is a figure to present those variables. Let me explain it to you. We can see that we have 2 labels. Well, this is label 1, this is label 2. This is a typo here. So level 1 we demarcated 2 subcategory, and this one and this one, and this is another label. They are also level 1, and level 2 is about university location and size. Okay. So 2 hypotheses emerge from these 2 subcategories. Hypothesis 1 is about parental qualification and occupation. Significantly contributed to students' EUC score. Hypothesis 2 is students' backgrounds, such as a particular gender, number of siblings, and the choice of high school course, produce significant influence on EUC score. And likewise, independent variables at least at the level 2 show significantly affect such outcomes, suggesting hypothesis 3, which is school location and size. So the next one is about subject. We successfully randomly sampled 1,050 students from 10 Chinese independent high schools in Malaysia, and obtained 960 valid subjects. And in order to examine those hypotheses, we perform the technique of two-level HLM. The next one is findings. We need to, in order to proceed the technical HLM, we need to look at the coefficient of non-model. The coefficient of ICC is 0.3142, indicating that 31.42% of the variation in EUC score is explained by the effect of the school level. So it indicates it's necessary to perform the technical HLM simply because the coefficient is much higher than the minimum criteria of 0.059. So the next one, we need to look at the determinant of UEC score, model 4 in compassion or variable at the levels 1 and 2 confirms father's and mother's qualification and the father's and mother's occupation as a significant contribute to students' UEC scores again. This result implies that when father's and mother's qualification left upper categories, students' UEC scores increase 0.32 and 0.62 units, respectively. Furthermore, when father's and mother's occupation move up a tier, the rate increases 0.15 and 0.05 units, respectively. The school variables are statistically significant in terms of constituting students' UEC score. High school location, gamma 01 is 1.16, and the high school size, gamma 02 is 0.40, are positively correlated with UEC scores. This correlation suggests students enrolled in urban high school on average obtain the scores 1.16 units higher in the UEC test than their counterparts in rural high school. Furthermore, when school size increases on the scale, it can improve 0.04 units. So the next issue is we need to look at the result of university attendance. Once again, before performing the technical HLM, we need to look at the ICC coefficient. And our coefficient is 0.2416, which is much higher than the minimum criteria of 0.059. So it's necessary to perform the technical HLM. So let's look at the significant predictors of university attendance. The results of Model 4 encompassing all variables at the levels 1 and 2 demonstrate that the students' university attendance is not significantly conditioned by father qualification, mother's occupation, gender, or sibling, because their probability is over 0.05. However, it becomes mother's qualification, omega 20 is 3.14, and father's occupation, omega 30 is 1.27. High school score, omega 60 is 0.60, and the UEC score, omega 80 is 4.36, all showed significance. These coefficients indicate that UEC score played the most crucial role in students' university attendance. When a student acquires a grade in the UEC score, their possibility of university attendance increased 4.36 times. The second vital variable is the mother's qualification. In that, when this improves by one calibration, the possibility of university attendance increases 3.14 times. The next most important variable is the father's occupation. Leveling up of which by one rank raises the possibility of university attendance 1.27 times. The final important variable is high school course, which might make a modest contribution to this possibility of 0.60. It means that if the major a student takes moves from the category of skill to that of business, their possibility of university admission increases 0.60 times. However, this ratio remains the same when the major is science in comparison with business. The next one, the third one, we are going to look at the result of determinant of university location. Once again, we need to check non-model again, and our coefficient is higher than the minimum criteria. So it means we need to perform the technical HLM. So let's look at the result of significant predictors of university location. The location of universities chosen by the sample students are not significantly affected either by family students variables or high school variables. It means no variables can affect this result. So let's look at discussion. All family variables significantly contribute to student UEC performance. Such contributions can be arranged in order of importance from mother's and father's qualification to father's and finally mother's occupation. As the above four elements constitute the core criteria for assessing family SES, one can deduce a principle that the students from high SES students can have a better EUC score. No, that is a type of UEC. In this regard, high SES student better result in the UEC test can be attributed to the sufficient volumes of cultural capital afforded by their parents. Our evidence thereby indirectly verifies this theory, the theory of cultural capital. Furthermore, mother's qualification among family variables play the most important role in students' UEC results. This discovery is similar to other related studies. Findings that the parent, particularly mother, act as the main family guardian of children learning procedures and outcomes. In other words, mother is the main act who look at their children's learning procedure and outcome. More importantly, because the first two family variables are associated with qualification, this connection suggests that the family cultural capital should be substantially mediated by parental education backgrounds, which often usher in education vision and actions. These correlations echo a rule proposed by related studies, which posited that the one-way convertible relation from economic capital to cultural capital, mainly proposed by Pierre Bourdieu and his disciples, and needs to be stimulated by educational belief that recognize the advantages of educational credentials, particularly upward mobility. It can therefore be inferred that the realization of the economical cultural capital formation is steered by parental education actions. In other words, parents' education qualification or education background generate parental education vision, and the vision further direct educational actions. At a deeper level, student UEC score can be viewed as the result of cultural capital because, according to Pierre Bourdieu, comprehending academic curriculum requires certain forms of reasoning ability, facilitated by the habitus which develops within social space as a result of cultural capital invested by parents. In this sense, students' UEC scores cannot be disentangled from family SES, while father's qualification and mother's occupation turn out to be statistically non-significant. Mother's qualification and father's occupation are ranked as the second and third most important variables, correlating with university attendance. As the father's qualification and as the mother's qualification and the father's occupation directly govern the transmission of cultural capital and the production of economic capital respectively. The influence of students' UEC scores is latently administered by family cultural capital, constructed and related by father's occupation and mother's qualifications, respectively. Regarding university locations, no variables in our study are statistically significant. These findings denote that if high SES students acquire sufficient cultural capital through their parents, their excellent educational achievements embodied in their UEC score will help them obtain more chance for university admission across different type of university location. So, while cultural capital yanked in social space regulates educational outcomes according to the perspective of cultural reproduction, our evidence suggests that its realization is not entirely dominated by contextual features. Rather, visionary agency, at least in our study, forced this practice to some extent. In other words, the practice of cultural capital is regulated or governed by parental visionary agency. Final part is conclusion. So, from those key points addressed in discussion, we are able to achieve some conclusions. It can be inferred that a one-way convertible relation from economic capital to cultural capital can be true. If parents can recognize the importance of educational credentials and employ appropriate education action to help their children in learning. So the key point is whether or not parents can employ the appropriate educational actions. And this action normally is regulated by their visionary agency. When visionary agency generated by better qualification is enshrined within the economical cultural capital formation, the intergenerational reproduction of cultural capital can be firmly secured. This recipe further indicates that the practice of cultural capital is not totally dominated by contextual futures, but is stimulated by qualification to some degree. That's why if qualification is the key element in constituting this situation, then we can understand why middle class parents are so active in terms of constructing learning environment for their children. These correlations prompt a principle that higher qualifications lead to positive education visions, methods, and actions that generate visionary agents, which become embedded within the realization of cultural capital, whereby a privileged position is related to high SES offspring as apparent in our findings. And in other words, our findings point out this situation that visionary agency is the key element in constituting inequity in education results. That's it, and this is my publication in the past year. If you want, you can download its PDF because its content is related to the key point I addressed here. Okay, thank you.